do we get around that? Do you think that we should be overly concerned about the term defunding? Should we try to change it? How much should we get caught up in the word defunding versus the action of actually reallocating money from the police?
Yeah, thanks for your question. I think that to contemplate the word defunding would probably distract from a lot of what we should be contemplating on, which is how much money the police are getting. I would want to really lift the fact that defunding the police is not new. This term, this action, this demand is not new. It's come out within the BLM movement, within Trayvon Martin, with Mike Brown. This has been something that advocates for a long time have been saying. So I want to really give credit to the people that have done the work for a long time to say this is strategic messaging, this is the right messaging, and it gets right to the point, which is equity. And many people have turned the word equity into like a D&I, DEI, diversity, inclusion, when it's always been about money. And I think it challenges people to really understand that abolition is an act of love. And that's a really scary word for a lot of people when we think about abolition. And instead of critiquing and looking at changing the word or maybe changing our messaging, I think it's important that we inform our politicians, our officials, as well as our people about the history of abolition, about how we've abolished police before, about how it's not a new idea, about how we can say Angela Davis's name all we want to when it's a meme, but her work is about abolition. So if we really want to lift Dr. Angela Davis and thankful for these minds that we have right now, I would rather interrogate people's conditioned mind to thinking that they cannot live without the protection of a fully funded police department rather than just the messaging.
Anyone else care to comment on that?
I was just going to share that, I think there are, Chelsea brought up abolition and, defunding in its original form and where it started from is about abolition. But I also don't think that is anything that we should be scared of. I love saying abolition is love, because it completely is. And when I was thinking about this today, like there's a lot of movements that stop short of abolition, and the end result is that the problems just end up being exacerbated on a smaller number of people by a smaller number of actors. You don't actually fix the issue. You can take lots of examples. You look at the death penalty. We actually were successful in abolishing the death penalty for a very brief time in the 1970s. People thought it was torture, and we got rid of it, and then we ended up bringing it back. But making it illegal to kill a small section of society, the severely mentally ill, or tweaking around the edges a little bit here and there, it didn't fix the problem. Ultimately, we shouldn't have tolerated the action, and only a complete removal of the practice was going to ultimately change that, not small reforms. So I think whatever we end up calling it, I think removing funding, rerouting funding in the most literal sense is defunding an agency, and shouldn't get caught up on the messaging as much as what needs to happen.
Bikura, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I was about to ask you, can you restate the question for me one more time?
Sure. So the question is, because defunding has become so polarizing and controversial, do you think that we should spend time trying to change the narrative, or how do you feel about just the general action of defunding? How do you interpret it? Do you think that there are different ways to look at it?
Well, it's depending on who you're speaking to. Defunding can mean a myriad of different things, and I think for it to work, there's going to have to be a consensus or an agreement of what that ultimately is, or it's going to be a smorgasbord of things across different spaces. I do think that we should be talking about rerouting resources and reallocating funds to communities to be able to, thrive. Because when you have oppressive systems that won't allow communities to do that, it becomes problematic. And then I guess the language or whatever the agenda is for an organization or police becomes predatory. And so we don't want to have that. So for me, trying to find a consistent messaging on what defunding is going to mean consistently is where I'm at.
So if I might ask, so we've heard rerouting, and we've also heard abolition. Where do each of you fall on the spectrum? Is it a process to go from point A to? If I could just ask, if you're not speaking, if you could just mute yourselves. Is there a process? Is
Kofi, you're muted.
Accidentally muted.
Sorry. So Bakira, I'll just restate the question really briefly. So you mentioned that there's a lot of different ways to look at this, and depending on who you ask, we could get all the way from talk about abolition, or we can talk about rerouting money. What is that happy medium? And I guess each of you might have a different point of view, but I just want to follow up with you, Bakira, on that one.
Speaking from a perspective of someone that is formerly incarcerated and have been involved in the system, and understanding the mindset of my criminal behavior when I was out there, I do indeed think it is definitely going to be a process, and I don't want to, for us to think that there isn't going to be. And so when we're taking, I believe that we need to gradually take funds from these oppressive systems, because if we're saying that we're going to completely defund it and then people don't have what they need, and we don't have a way to stop predators from entering into our communities, it's going to be something that we're not going to want. And I'm telling you, from a mindset of when I was out there and didn't have the things that I needed, and being one that my back was pushed up against the wall with children, I began to commit white collar crimes. And those, like when we're having these conversations, are you also willing to be a victim of crime while we are defunding? Like, that is some real live conversations that you got to have, because just because we say defunding doesn't mean that, it's everybody's going to be kumbaya and out here in these streets. And so what are you willing to sacrifice to get to this place of complete abolishment?
Yeah, and I think that's what's really beautiful about abolition, is that it's not a utopia. And I think it's, to kind of answer the question too, is that abolition is about divesting, investing. It is a cycle. It is taking money from a system of harm and giving it to a system of care. And the reason why we don't know what it looks like exactly is because it should be a people-driven process from the place and space. So every community should be able to decide what that money that is divested from a harmful process should look like in their community and meet their needs. And so I think that's what's also beautiful about this process, that it allows the public to have input about where that money in restitution goes. And I think as long as we're all on the same page of we have to defund the police to get there, that allows us to stay in the right value set to avoid what Jenny was talking about, of trying to take only the incremental steps that we've seen will only perpetuate the problem for a very vulnerable set of people. And so right now we have a radical movement. It's great to think radically as well, but it will be a process. Abolition is not a utopia. Ending policing is not the end all be all. The whole criminal justice system as itself, I don't even know if people are ready to talk about abolishing prisons. But, so I think this is a process. Like, just talking about the police, this is a process, but definitely appreciate some of the comments that are actually happening too in the chat.
Yeah, I would share, just it made me think about how there's so many other facets of this that could be defunded, and you could just dovetail off of it. for instance, prosecutors' offices, thinking about how that role shrinks and what that role looks like in a world where maybe you're not arresting as many people, or that's not the mechanism that we are spending most of our dollars in. So there's lots of other aspects of this, and definitely end all be all is not, abolishing the police. I would say personally, I totally endorse abolishing, dismantling, and getting rid of an institution that was originally created to do racist things to Black people. I think the ACLU as an organization is spending, I think their messaging is a lot more on point with let's just reroute the funds. But I do think that is somewhat strategic in being able to bring over folks that are maybe potentially at the very beginning or not even having started any journey of becoming an anti-racist. So, how do you pull those people along? And, realizing that the majority of our General Assembly is white men, who I, after having spoken and had many conversations with them, I do not think they are the majority on any journey toward becoming an anti-racist or trying to actively push anti-racist legislation. But I do think that personally, I think dismantling it down to bare bones and rebuilding something that actually works for everybody is where we should be headed. And doing that with a multitude of the pieces of the criminal justice system that is not a justice system.
So I want to maybe take a step back a little bit. So first of all, Robin, were you able to make it back on? Okay. Unfortunately, we lost one of our panelists. Her so Robin was going to give some firsthand accounts as to her experiences with the police, and some of her loved ones and family members and things like that. So well, if she has an opportunity to hop back on, we'll put her back on. But I wanted to maybe take a step back a little bit and talk about some of the things that are wrong. Like how do we get here? I mean, a couple of you made the point that like the system is working exactly the way it's supposed to work. Can we peel that back a little bit and talk about like give some of the audience who may not have that dealing with the police on a regular basis, or may not really quite understand that the incidents like George Floyd are not isolated incidents, and like this is actually a systemic problem as to how the police function and treat Black people and brown people, and kind of maybe give some historical context. I think some of you touched on it before, but maybe we could spend a couple of minutes just kind of explaining that a little bit further.
So if I could, I would like to kind of address that question or that statement that you just put out there. So I'm LaVonna Moore Davis. I'm actually the aunt of Kwanzaa Jamal Beatty, KJ, who was murdered by Newport News Police Department in 2016. And so when you talk about the differences in how police officers deal with young Black people in general, I would tell you it is an everyday scenario for people of color, and not just people of color, but depending on what neighborhood you live in, you see it as well. So a great example of that is my deceased nephew. When he came to live with me in Augusta, Georgia, he was actually stopped by police officers riding in the car with a young white man. And the gentleman that was driving did not have a license. And so the police officer looked over to my nephew and he said, "Hey, young man, do you have a license?" He said, "Yes, sir, I have a license." He allowed my nephew to get out of the car and drive the car to their destination because he had a license, and the young man that was driving did not. Now, growing up in Newport News downtown, I will tell you that scenario would have gone completely different had that been the same car, the same two young men driving in downtown Newport News. I go home all the time, and I'm retired military. I possess a top secret security clearance. I've done intelligence work for the government for over 20 plus years, and I have been stopped unnecessarily for driving a luxury car in downtown Newport News. And when I ask the police officer, "Why did you pull me over?" they can't give me a reason. They'll come up with some bogus reason like, "Oh, you had a tail light that was out." I get out of the car and look, my tail light's not out. What are you talking about? So it is a systemic issue in urban communities where police regularly target African Americans. So they don't feel safe. Everywhere you go, you can't even walk to the corner store without, police officers slowing down and profiling them. My brother was thrown on the ground for walking through the neighborhood because he met the description of someone who had done a crime, wasn't asked for his ID to try to see if he was the person that actually committed the crime. He was thrown on the ground, had a gun placed to his head. And then when he said, my ID is in my pocket, and they finally pulled the ID out of his pocket and saw that he wasn't the gentleman in question, no apology, nothing. They just picked him up off the ground and was like, okay, you have a good day, and walked away. That type of behavior is not tolerated in the suburban neighborhoods that I live in. But when I go home, this is every African American's daily routine. You can't go to the store, you can't go to your car, you can't stand outside your house and commune with friends without being considered a target or a suspect. And that mentality is what is driving a lot of this in our communities. There are people being placed in our communities that don't understand how we talk. They don't understand our mannerisms. They don't understand our frustration and our fear. And so their fear is being projected upon us as you're automatically a criminal for doing regular everyday stuff that any other person in a suburban neighborhood, police wouldn't even look twice at them for doing the same things. So we have to address those kind of issues first and say, what type of people are we putting in our neighborhoods? Like, are they going to understand the culture? Are they going to understand the mentality? Or are they just going to see a young Black man or woman and automatically assume that I'm dealing with a criminal simply because of the color of this person's skin or the neighborhood that they're walking or playing or residing in at that time?
I like to add to that.
Oh,
Go ahead, go. Because I currently live in a suburban area in Chesterfield, and we are profiled in Chesterfield. I just not too long ago had a cop pull me over. He followed me for about 7 minutes, and then I turned into my subdivision and where he pulled me over at. And I figured he pulled me because I'm not supposed to be in that subdivision. And when I asked him why he pulled me, he said, "Oh, you were going below the speed limit." I was going 3 miles below the speed limit, and he said he thought something was wrong. But he still, once I told him that it wasn't, he still, wanted to ask for my ID, insurance, and registration for the car, which was interesting. And so in that pretense, I feel like in Chesterfield, there's such a great presence of police officers to keep Black people out of that community. And so, white people are safe within that context. And so they over police so that we don't even move in those communities.
I want to give Robin a chance to get back in here. I saw you were able to hop back on. Robin, would you care to share your story about some of the instances with police misconduct that you and Lamonte experienced over the last couple of days? First of all, how's Lamonte doing now?
He's in a lot of pain. Can you hear me, Kofi?
We can.
Okay, Lamonte he's going through physical therapy. He was hit in the face with a stun gun, and he lost a lot of memory, I can tell. And it hurts me to see this go on, with people suffering after the fact of being assaulted for something, a mistaken identity. He's not Anthony, and he's Lamonte. I know he can't look like this guy, but just mistaken identity. They need to get a better way of finding these individuals they're looking for, because just it's harsh with his situation, and I feel bad, and it hurts me, and my child, it hurts him too. And the family gets no therapy for this going on. I don't, where is the help? Nobody's calling to check on his son, his kids. This is on national TV. And, I don't think it would have been out if it wasn't for the body cams. And why all the officers don't have body cams. But my thing is, I was at Springfield. This was back in 2015, October 28th. I was in Springfield, a football game for the Youth Association of Gum Springs. My daughters were cheering, and I asked to get out this parking spot. I got out the parking spot. It took a long time when I got out, the police were behind me and they said we committed a robbery in the area and they had guns on me and my children. It's a lot. And also that next year, 2016, the police had a search warrant to come in my house. They said I was selling drugs in the community and I was at a policy council meeting at Gum Springs. They made up this whole story on me and it's not true. And I'm trying to fight it right now anyway, but the police officers, and they went to my housing and they said, you have to work for the police. You and your children have to work for the police. Can you, I said, no. So they went to my housing and told all these lies to my housing. And, me and my kids were homeless for 2 years. And, we all land in the 2 bedrooms, 7 people because of Fairfax County, because they lied. And they want these people work for the police. How is that? What is going on with this stuff in our community? Why are we targeted like this? And how come nobody believe you and nobody help you? I feel like I can't breathe. There's a lot going on and it's harsh in this community. I've been here since 1986. My dad came over here for a better life from DC, Washington, DC. And it don't seem like that way.
Thanks for sharing those stories. I know it's difficult for you to have to relive those every time. So we really do appreciate you sharing it. And I hope that one of the things that the audience takes away from this is that just because these things happen, first of all, they happen repeatedly. Oftentimes to the same people over and over. And every time that trauma happens, it stays with them, right? So it's something that it's not like it happens once and it goes away. Robin was saying about how her loved one Lavante ended up losing memory and things like that. So they're real physical, mental, emotional repercussions that takes such a toll on these individuals, and it takes a toll on their family members and their friends and everything else. And so that's hopefully that kind of puts things into a different context, that it's not just like it happens and then it's done. So I want to shift the conversation a little bit to talking about so if we are going in the route of defunding, if we could maybe talk a little bit about, first of all, how much money, maybe, put some of this into a monetary context. How much money does the Virginia's taxpayers invest or spend on policing? And Jenny, I don't know if you have those numbers with you, but could you help us understand that?
Sure. And thank you for sharing your story. So the Commonwealth Institute has done some work. They're a great organization that does a lot of budget analysis. So I just want to give credit where credit's due there, that they since a lot of the protests have started, they've started compiling how much money are we spending on policing. So we spend about $1.4 billion. I'll say that just in case anybody heard million. $1.4 billion annually between all the local and statewide police. That is a number that has been pretty consistent since 2006. And if you look over the last 12 years, it's actually decreased by probably about 0.5%, according to the TCI. That being said, though, I mean, you can look at smaller pieces of the puzzle. You can look at the state police, for instance, that are patrolling all of our highways, and that particular part has increased in spending by about 22%. I think the important thing here is, like, even if something looks like it's kind of like leveling out in the wash, like we're spending this ridiculous amount, but it's basically the same that we've spent for a while. Usually you think with a budget that spending is associated or correlated with, especially spending on police, correlated with a decrease in crime, or you saw a decrease in crime, you would, in theory, see a decrease in spending. And that just isn't the case. Violent crime in Virginia has been decreasing, and it's steadily. And I'm not saying that to, pat anybody in the back in the police department for doing that, but Virginia's seen probably about a 30% drop in violent crime in that same time span, where the budget has stagnated. So, logically, the amount that we're spending just doesn't make a lot of sense. There's a great website, I'll try and remember the name of it, that looks at different cities and how much the cities spend of their budget, but there's a lot that goes into a policing budget, and there's several organizations that are trying really quickly to figure out how much money is being spent on a local level, because I think that's an important number too, just not just these big these big statewide numbers, but actually looking at these smaller pieces that you have a lot more control over in your city council, and being able to advocate for changes there.
Thanks, Jenny. So I think you raise a really important fact. The fact that crime has actually been going down while the budgets haven't. I think when people talk about like we need to defund, they think, well, we're going to be losing something, but it doesn't. It actually is a very logical conclusion to say, like, if the crime is down, then why couldn't we actually right size the budget to where the crime, to where things were before the decrease started happening? I think also nationally, similar trends have been happening, right? So nationally, police budgets have actually been increasing even throughout periods when crime rates have been decreasing. And so I think this is one of those just kind of a logical arguments that even if you take the emotional side out of this, and you just want to look at just the numbers, police budgets should be lower just because there isn't as much crime. So just wanted to throw that out there. So I throw this question out to you, Bakura. Oh, go ahead, Chelsea. You wanted to add something?
Before we leave, I just want to wrap that whole statement into the final conclusion, which is policing does not decrease crime. I think that's what the final conclusion of this is we need to all take away that nothing to do with policing actually helps anything to do with crime, because all the research shows that crime is actually more tied to poverty, and policing enforces poverty and keeps people in poverty, if not enchained within our carceral system. So that's the final thought there.
Mm-hmm. So thanks, Chelsea. And while we're on that, I guess I'll throw out some numbers as far as like the efficacy of policing. So approximately 66% of rapes go unsolved, 70% of robberies go unsolved, almost 50% of assaults go unsolved. The idea that if it weren't for police, these things would somehow wouldn't get solved, and it's also a kind of a misnomer. Bakura, I wanted to kind of throw a question out to you and to any of the panelists, actually. So if we are going to move money from the police, can we talk about a little bit about where exactly that money would go? We touched on it a little bit. Can we dig a little deeper as to where we think that money would be better invested, and why, as Chelsea, as you say, if we do things to erase poverty, then that actually is a better predictor of how we can reduce crime.
If you see a single parent struggling with children, and the children have mental health issues, and it's hard to get counseling and therapy in the homes, I think that money should go to single mothers who having a hard time with therapy and housing. It's like not enough in this area. I go to CSB, but they don't have enough for 3 kids. They can only see 1 or 2 children. And I think it should go to mental health. And, like even housing with the single mothers, like I have a petty larceny charge for $23, another one for $44, another one for baby clothes, baby milk, Pampers. If you see a mother out there, why give her the third one? I had pots and pans, $56, but I end up with a felony just for that. And, if you see a mother struggling for household and goods, they should at least try to help the mothers in the home instead of locking them up. Some funding should go to single mothers and struggle with a struggling household, instead of giving them a felony where they can't even find a job. Like I have my CDLs, I could drive school buses. I go to get a job, they won't let me have a job because of those petty larceny charges.
That's what I was going to say, is that, you know, some of the funding should definitely go to, you know, employment assistance services, because a lot of people who do get charges, whether, you know, it's a misdemeanor or whatever the case may be, a lot of jobs don't want to hire people. So now you have people who have, you know, gotten charges and now they're trying to find work and they can't find work because no one wants to hire them, because there aren't any of these collaborative programs with these companies saying, hey, we have X amount of people who we're trying to help rehabilitate themselves back into society. So we need you to give X percentage of jobs to these people through whatever agreements or whatever funding is required to make that happen. Because a lot of the crime in these neighborhoods are, in my opinion, a direct result of people not having the resources and the monetary assets in order to survive. Like stealing out of stores, different things like that. A lot of this stuff is out of necessity. It's not because people wake up in the morning and say, hey, I want to be a criminal. I want to rob something. I want to go steal something. When your kids are in the house crying and you can't feed them and you can't clothe them and no one's willing to give you a job because you have charges, it puts you in a mindset where you're like, I have to do whatever I need to do in order to survive. And no one's looking at that part of it. Like the lack of job opportunities, the lack of opportunities, period, that you see in urban communities is a direct reflection of the crime that exists in those communities, because no one's given the opportunities.
And I just want to reframe the word crime, because, like, remember, crime is just actually the system criminalizing people. Like, that's what Lavana's talking about, like those needs, those basic needs that are not met. We have criminalized certain people in certain neighborhoods, to touch on what Jenny was saying earlier about we've solved certain problems, but still in certain concentrated areas, people are really impacted. And so that's how these types of disenfranchisements and disinvestments from the communities, from programs, from housing, from helping mothers and families to going to police has impacted our communities. Is that we're now hearing stories that we're saying we can't survive, and people are like, well, we're scared. And that's what feels like the defunding conversation is some people in a certain class feel like the police provide protection, where we are saying that they actually are sending us into the jail system while continuing this narrative that it's our fault that our needs aren't met.
Yeah, I wanted to just touch on something Chelsea just said about, you know, we need to redefine crime and risk and some of these things that we think we have really clear definitions for, because, you know, hearing Robin's story, you know, someone who's been a victim of the 3 strikes law in Virginia that has been unsuccessfully repealed. You know, there's all this is interconnected. You know, we need to, I'm taking so many notes on the types of things that we can share with legislators of where they should be redirecting these funds, because I mean, expungement reform, things like that, they're just basic stuff that's preventing people from getting jobs and being able to thrive. As far as I wanted to share something else too about, you know, one, I think it's really telling that, like, being a white person on this panel, I don't have any stories like that. I don't have those stories to share. And while I think that's incredibly fortunate and privileged, I imagine a lot of the white people who are listening to these stories are in a similar boat. I don't know what that's like at all. I want to name that. And I also just want to share, like, what I can kind of offer in that situation is, from an aggregate standpoint, you know, I mentioned this polling we did a couple of years ago, and one of the weirdest results, right, like, the term weird, but was that over 70% of Virginians said the system is unfair, and the criminal legal system is unfair. And it's unfair for 2 really big primary reasons. And it was, like, overwhelming that people thought that it was unfair based on race, and that it was unfair based on how much money you had. So that was how the unfairness was showing up. Then you ask people, is the system working? And overwhelming majority of people said it's working. And it kind of left me, there's, like, really like scratching my head, like how, you know, this was a couple of years ago, like how is that possible? How can people think that that's working? And it's all the things people are sharing right here. You know, it's working for some people. And even more disturbing is that the people that it's working for are super comfortable, or at the time were super comfortable with that. So, you know, just to answer, you know, your original question about where should the money go, I think we should all listen to everybody on this panel about where the money should go. And you should tell your legislators where the money should go, and get that information into the hands of really translate it.
I'd like to follow up on that and agree that I have never been treated that way. And in fact, it's been just the opposite. My family has gotten breaks that I can't believe they've gotten after after 2 traffic accidents, and they weren't even charged with reckless driving or anything where they probably really should have been. So there's really another side to this coin, and that is that people get breaks that they really probably shouldn't.
So we're gonna turn things over to audience questions in about 5 minutes or so. And I know you guys have a lot of questions. Feel free to also put them into the chat, whether it be the Facebook Live or the Zoom. Bakura, did you have any thoughts as to where you think that money should go? Any specific ideas?
Yes, when we talk about defunding and putting money back into the extension of policing, such as social workers, teachers, all of those people are mandatory reporters in this system, which I do not agree with. I've seen the devastation that come from mandatory reporters that are an extension of the police. And so for me, like when we talk about counselors, I think about mentors and mediators that are not a part of the system, that money can be better used to support that work, so that we don't have to have people that are mandatorily required to turn people over to an oppressive system and things like that. And then when we think about the school of thought of those very people, they're still up underneath those oppressive systems that are teaching methods of psychology and biology. And so I would like to challenge us to think of alternative methods to help in our communities that are not proponents of mandatory reporters.
So thanks for that, Bakura. So just staying on that topic, if you could maybe transition the conversation to kind of focus more on our juvenile justice system, our school resource officers, and to your point, Bakura, where you just talked about some of the issues that happens in school where kids end up getting funneled into the prison system. You know, we all heard the term the school to prison pipeline. Can we talk about that in a defunding context? So how does these systems are being detrimental to Black and brown kids, and what can we do to fix them?
Well, there's definitely, we don't talk about the foster care to prison pipeline. We always look at it from a primary school on up pipeline, but there is a pipeline that actually starts at infancy. In fact, we can even go as far as into the womb, where parents are targeted before the child is even brought into the planet, that this system CPS is going to take this baby, be it for neglect or abuse, which all of those things can be subjective depending on who is the one that's filing the report. And so when we allow these systems to attack families, we got to look at it from a community standpoint. They're actually attacking communities, because most of these people that come into our homes lack cultural competency. They don't understand how we live, our language, our cultures, and things like that, especially when it comes down to spankings. They say, oh, spankings are horrible. We got to, save this child, when the child is not in danger. But yet, when the child is facing some type of behavioral problems because they were not taught discipline, now the system is ready to incarcerate and to put some type of punitive behavior on these children, and to remove them from the very systems. And a family unit is a system that really cares about these children, and take them out of the system and put them with people who are just working and receiving a check and have no obligation to care for that, for that child. And so that is what is so concerning for me.
Robin, I know you had shared some stories with me a few days earlier as we were talking about this panel about situations that your kids were caught up in. Would you care to share that with the panel?
Yes, my daughter, we live right here by the 7-Eleven, and I spend lots of money there. But the people called the police on my daughter. She's 14 years old. She walked out with a Slurpee, and the police arrested her because I wouldn't give them her name. And I didn't. I'm like, but they didn't offer me to pay. But the police officer told the juvenile that I refused to pay, and I have a video on that, and that wasn't true. And they should not arrest my child over $1.49 Slurpee when and actually the man offered her, she could have it. Her friend took the Slurpee. But it's just horrible, and it's just something needs to be better with this system with these juveniles. You have these juveniles out here, it was like 10 girls one time. It was back in 2018. They come to my house to fight my daughter. My daughter went out to fight, and I had nothing to do with it, but I grabbed the pole from behind the door because I didn't want them to jump my daughter. And they charged me with malicious wounding. And they try to hold me without bond. And I was protecting my daughter. We got to the place, to the courtroom, the prosecutor's like, I can't charge her with malicious wounding. She didn't do anything. They said, okay, we take it to assault. And they sat there, and when the judge saw the video, she was like, no, Robin was protecting her daughter, dismissed this case, but police are putting these cases in these courthouses. And, it's just horrible towards people of color and in this community, and harassing these children for a Slurpee. And I had money in my pocket to pay for Slurpee. They never told me to pay for the Slurpee. It's on video. And police need to stop lying to, they need to tell the truth. They need to stop lying. It's a lot of lies, but something has to get better. Try to rip a family apart and put stuff on people's criminal records. It's just horrible.
And I think that's really important to lift, is that cops lie a lot. Like a lot. I just wanted to put that in there. Like a lot, y'all.
Yes, they do.
That's why our cell phones are our biggest defense, because the only way for our stories to be validated, unfortunately, we're not going to listen to the mothers like Robin the way that we should. And we're only going to have these. And that, so I just want to say cops lie.
I would tell you firsthand that yes, and even in my nephew's case, I was sharing this with Miss Wallace earlier, where during his case, we watched the police officers change their story 4 times in the news coverage that was being put out about his murder. And they said that my nephew had a gun. He pointed it at police officers. And when the family paid to get the toxology and the autopsy report before police officers, and his fingerprints nor DNA was on the gun at all. So where did this gun come from? And this is not something that is unusual in these neighborhoods for police officers to plant weapons after the fact, or even some of them are planting drugs after the fact. Like, there are police officers in our neighborhoods that are a part of drug rings and gang rings within these neighborhoods. And because the police department is allowed to investigate themselves, the lies just continue. And it's the cover stories and the lies on top of lies on top of lies. And when you request for federal assistance, no one wants to hear it, because you have, a Commonwealth attorney who's in cahoots with them as well, who's justifying this stuff, instead of saying, let's properly investigate this stuff and see what's going on and get to the root of these issues. Because there's a lot of corrupt cops operating in these areas, and they're a part of the problem, and they cover it up. And the families cry out and say, where's the justice? We have X amount of witnesses saying that this did not happen. And it's these constant cover-ups and these constant lies that go on in the community. And then they wonder why Black men run as soon as they see police. They wonder why people don't trust the people that we're told are coming into our communities to protect us, because we're being raped and brutalized and murdered by people who are saying, I'm here to help you. No, you're not here to help me. You're here to hurt me. You're here to subdue me. You're here to keep me in chains and keep me in a mental state of slavery. And so that is why African Americans don't like police officers. That is why when they come into our neighborhoods, automatically they get a sense of resistance from us, because there is no trust. There is no loyalty. There are no good experiences. There are very few. I don't think I've ever heard any African American that lives in an urban neighborhood or even in suburban neighborhoods that would tell you they had a good experience with a police officer.
And to piggyback on that, like I said, I'm a victim of police brutality, and right now I filed in federal court and I filed in, Fairfax County Court, because I have paperwork where I was falsely accused of doing something that I didn't do. And I spent 7 months in jail for a crime I didn't commit, and I'm fighting for it right now. I have the paperwork, and nobody wants to help, and I'm doing it myself. I filed the wrong paper in the wrong area of the court. I had to file it in the right area. But this is all the police reports they made. I didn't make this stuff. They made this stuff. Police lie really bad, and they make up things on people, brown people of color.
I was just going
to also add,
go ahead.
That none of this would be possible without our judges. And I have a huge problem with our judges, and just holding the whole system, the judicial system, accountable for what happens, because a case could not be adjudicated either guilty or not guilty without the judges, no matter what the police bring. And these judges know who's telling the truth and who's not. And they'll still sit there with the evidence showing what these officers have done and still say not guilty. And so I want us to start putting some pressure on these judges, because right now we're letting them get by with everything that we're doing because nobody is talking about these judges. And so while we're talking about the police, let's also talk about the people who allowed this to happen, or who allow the police to continue to operate in that spirit. And that's our judges and our prosecutors and defense attorneys that will not file complaints on lawyers and judges that abuse their authority in the courthouse.
And yes, that's what I'm going through right now. I started a petition with change.org, Robin McMillan, because of what, like she said, it's that's a like the violation of your Sixth Amendment. And yes, it's my lawyer knew that I was innocent, but he was so scared of the cops would threaten him. And these defense attorneys are taking people money and not helping these people, and legal malpractice. But it's sad, and it's not right, and I'm going through it right now.
I just want to lift what Bakura is saying with an example of what's happening in this movement right now, that about everyone's talking about monuments, right? Outside, we're talking about policing the right stuff. But here's an example, is that what a lot of people are not talking about is the Robert E. Lee Monument that's right here in Richmond, Virginia, that has not been removed, has had 7 judges to recuse themselves from these cases because they have some type of conflict of interest. Now, they don't have to report what that conflict of interest is. We know the last one is that they live too close to it and they have literally an investment real estate conflict. But 7 judges in Virginia have some type of conflict to the Confederacy to where they cannot oversee this case, y'all. So when we're talking about what Bakura is saying about who's really continuing to enslave us, is because most of the people in our power of the judicial system still have a mindset to where they're literally cannot oversee cases about the Confederacy because there's a conflict of interest.
I want to take a couple minutes and I appreciate all everyone's sharing their personal stories, especially. I want to take a couple of minutes to talk about school resource officers. I know there's a push to remove them from the schools. And I personally, I feel like it's something that needs to happen. A lot of schools have other methods of security and the administrative staff and what happens is a lot of times is that school resource officers bleed over into the administrative side, and they start charging students with things like disorderly conduct and things like that. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that and why it's important to remove school resource officers from schools. And especially when we talk about it in the defunding context, that there's a lot of money being spent on that. I'm not sure if we have the figures as to how much money we could actually save if we just did away with those programs in particular, but I wanted to take a couple minutes to discuss that topic. So to any of the panelists who have either personal experience dealing with the issues will be great.
I'd certainly agree with removing school resource officers. I teach my children their rights, but when you are approached by a police officer, it's totally different than being approached by an independent security guard. There's different safeguards, due process that attaches, and if our children don't know due process rights, their rights can very easily be violated. And because what they say and do can be used against them in a court of law, just by that virtue alone, they need to be removed. Just by that alone, because of the trickery that can be used against minors in that context. And my son was approached by an officer at Warwick High School, and they wanted to search him, and he refused. And so when he refused, the principal then went to suspend him from school for disorderly conduct. It was I welcome that behavior because I love the challenge, and I want to help my parents learn how to deal with those type of situations. I never signed the parent teacher handbook. For one, I send back a contract of how you'll deal with me and my children, and they never refuted. And so my affidavit stands. That's for one. We got to watch how we're contracting with these agencies. For two, he was back in school that next day. So because that contract that I sent in that they didn't refute, I was able to control the narrative and control how they deal with my child. And so that's very important that we understand the contract that we're signing. We may think it's great and we're parents of the year by signing the parent teacher handbook, but that is a contract that allows them to do a lot of things that I don't think our parents understand, because there's undisclosed adhesion agreements that go with that.
I did want to touch on removing, these I'm not even going to say police officers, because they're kind of like top flight security in the schools, mainly because of not just the threat that Ms. Shabazz was talking about, but I would say psychologically as well. When you put certain systems in place, when children walk into school and I'm treated like a criminal before I can even get to my classroom, it breeds certain type of behaviors. Like there have been a lot of psychological studies done on, children in the same classroom, where if I talk a certain way to one child, that is discouraging and demoralizing and demeaning, but I'm speaking to another child, encouraging them and uplifting them, how those type of things affect test scores. It affects the way that our children learn across the board. So we have to look at how we're treating these children when they walk into institution of learning. Like what type of message are we sending them from the minute they walk in the door? Are we treating them like criminals, or are we treating them like people who are happy to learn? And additionally, no one is taking into consideration that when these children walk outside of these schools, the type of environment that some of them are walking into. Like there's a lot of PTSD that exists amongst our African-American youth, because they go home every day to gunshots at night. I remember growing up in downtown Newport News, sitting on the floor after sunset because my mom didn't want us to sit on the couch because she was afraid that bullets would come through the window, because there were literal shootouts that would go on every night in my neighborhood. So these are the things that our youth carry with them into these classrooms and into these institutions of learning. And then you take that PTSD, and now I'm going to reinforce that by having a police officer greet you in the morning instead of your teacher saying good morning, Mr. or Mrs., and addressing them properly. Now I got to search your backpack, and I'm treating you like a criminal before you even get to your classroom. So it's the psychological aspect as well that I don't think people are considering. It's like you're basically further desensitizing these children. We're not allowing them to be children. We're not allowing them to have a safe space. They're not safe at home. They're not safe at school. They're not safe when they walk to the store. They're not safe anywhere. And at some point, that's going to cause a reaction, whether it be negative or positive, whether it be positive like what we're doing here, or negative because they just have so much pent up rage and so much PTSD from just living every single day in this type of environment. So we have to start considering like, what are the psychological effects of the systems that we're putting in place when we're dealing with, you know, children of color and dealing with, you know, children that are growing up in these type of environments. Like, what are we ultimately implanting in them? What type of message are we sending them when we're bringing them into these schools and they're greeted by police officers?
I just wanted to add that, you know, I think the negative consequences of having police officers in schools is so clear. I mean, it's not only well documented in personal stories, and it's well documented in studies that there are really negative consequences, and it disproportionately affects children of color. But on the flip side of that, no studies that show that having student resource officers in schools makes the school any safer. And if we want to look at, you know, some indication of what we consider to be like safe schools, you know, obviously school shootings is a huge problem in America. And in 2018, there was a pretty large study done of incidents where there was gun violence in school. 2 times in those 200 incidents was a SRO able to actually intervene and make a difference. And I think that's probably even potentially not accurate. I think there's just nothing to show the positives. There's everything to show the negatives. And right now in Virginia, we spend $9 million. We're slated to spend $9 million on that over the next couple of years. There's currently a proposal that Delegate Kay Quarry has put out there to defund that, probably by about 90%, because we spend closer to 10 million. So she hasn't completely stripped it. I think we should strip it completely and just get rid of it. It's a terrible program.
Yes, I completely agree with everyone and everything that's being said. I'm a recent graduate of public school, so I can definitely attest to the ineffectiveness of SROs within the school system. As was said before, they were mainly implemented, I know, in my school after all of the school shootings had went down. And so we got SROs, we had metal detectors, and they started doing more searches. And throughout that whole ordeal, the SROs were only trained to do what in an event of a school shooting, but a school shooting wasn't very relevant in my community. So it was just police officers idly standing around and just being there, and they were used to diffuse behavioral issues of insubordination, fights between teenagers and things of that nature. We have random searches throughout our classrooms of suspicion of drugs or things of that nature. We have random bus checks. So they were brought for one reason, but then ended up being utilized for another because the reason that they were brought wasn't prevalent in my community. So I definitely agree with the idea of defunding the SRO program and instituting people who understand the challenges of the children in our community. Like was brought up before, a lot of the children were bringing guns to school, not because they wanted to inflict any harm on anybody in the school building, but because they were preyed on by people in the community at large. So they were getting targeted by gang members before they got off the bus and after they got off the bus, and they needed the weapons to protect themselves on the way home. And so they were getting charged and brought out of school in these big spectacles for something that they needed to survive, rather than being given the counseling and the resources needed so that they could be safe boarding and exiting the bus. So I definitely agree that the defunding of SROs is important, and replace them with credible messengers who understand the environment that the kids are coming from, and mental health professionals that can diffuse the situations that go on in and outside of the school building.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kayla. I'm gonna turn I know we have a lot of questions that have been posed. Latanya, would you care to ask some of those? I'm gonna turn the program over to you at this point.
Okay, so I'm going back up through the chat to pull some of the questions and comments made by attendees. One question is for the panelists from Michael Heminger. Hope I pronounced that right. In thinking about police reform and the disparities that occur, I wonder if you could ask the panelists about their thoughts on the use of pretextual policing and how we might address that change in legislature. And that is addressing pretextual stops. Philando Castile was stopped 52 times before he was murdered. And the officer that stopped Sandra Bland had over 1,600 pretextual stops in 1 year. So for the panelists, how would they look to address that in the legislature?
I can take a small stab, but I think folks probably have lots of thoughts on this of how to do this. So I'm not going to take the marijuana away from you, Chelsea. You can talk about. I'm not even talking about marijuana. There are. I mean, the short answer is just take it out. You know, or like go and find the places where it's being allowed and take it out, and repeal some of these things. I think, you know, in looking at arrest data, like I'm not like overemphasizing numbers, but you know, the number 1, 2, and 3 things that people get stopped for being pulled over for: expired registration, expired tax, expired inspection sticker, sorry, and then marijuana. So I'm not going to touch on that last one, like I promised. But I mean, like really like ask yourself the question, like, why is that the job of a police officer? What is the public safety implication of an expired inspection sticker? It's just insane. I mean, it doesn't even make any sense. And then if you look at that, even just one of the more recent videos that came out the other day, like the rationale, it was twofold for pulling this man over. It was I smell marijuana once he was stopped. And then, but the initial interaction was a result of an expired tag. It's bizarre. I mean, if you look at things like that and start breaking it down, it starts to really become increasingly obvious that it's intentional. It's intentional reasons to be able to pull over Black people so that you can then engage even further under some pretense that you're protecting people. It's absolutely ludicrous. And it's not happening at the same rate to everybody. That's a complete understatement. But the simple answer is you can just literally go through the code and figure out what is giving police the license to do this, and then strip it. I mean, personally, from an ACLU standpoint, I think we should be talking about legalizing all drugs. I don't think that I think that sounds kind of radical when you first say it, but what is the public safety implication of a person necessarily doing drugs? It seems kind of crazy, and we're looking at that, and that's a good segue to Chelsea of like, we already do that in some ways. You know, we're looking at marijuana in particular, but yeah, just get out of the code.
Thank you, Jenny.
And I'll just dive into marijuana. I'm like wearing my shirt just by happen. I've actually run Marijuana Justice here. We are close partners with the ACLU Virginia, and we're a Black-led nonprofit that works in the General Assembly, and we work particularly for this reason of decriminalizing marijuana, because of what here in Virginia we call a lot field interviews that happen to be because someone smells marijuana. I'll just let everyone to know that we have a majority Democrats General Assembly this past session, and we still could not get the right type of equitable decrim passed. So we can have decrims or Democrats all we want to, but we still have to understand that even our legislators are not grasping the great harm of what the smell of marijuana can mean for someone's life or death situation. So right now we are actually still working to fight as we work to legalize it equitably, our fight along with the ACLU. And we also work very closely with Rise for Youth, because what we saw as they decriminalized marijuana their way with many penalties, they actually made it harder for youth within those laws. So now youth have to face harder penalties around marijuana starting on July 1, while all the adults are like celebrating. But we're not understanding that that's another profit margin for them, because it's one advocate we had during session said it's like a front door opening but kicking open the back door to get our youth in. So Rise for Youth is also part of that work with us and advocating for an equitable way to just remove policing from, remove the tool of policing from any type of marijuana enforcement. And so our bill with Jennifer Carroll Foy was actually to remove the code of marijuana possession completely. Right now it's decriminalized, but it's still illegal, y'all. And so what we're saying is just remove it from the code, and therefore they would not have a reason to even say smelling of marijuana would be a reason to approach you.
Great point. Thank you. And thank you for the work you've been doing with marijuana justice, Chelsea. Heather, I think it's Foglio. I see your hand up. Did you still want to comment?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh yes, I would love to. Particularly on the SRO issue. I just want to say there's some facts that are really important. Is that, I mean, in the 20 years since Columbine, I think there's been one school shooting that was what's the word I'm looking for? Prevented from an SRO, right? In 20 years since Columbine. And how many school shootings have we had since then? And so when we look at the SRO position and the effect on Black and brown children in the school to prison pipeline and preventing school shootings, it's a no-brainer to me and to moms. Demand action. We support removing SROs actually from school and replacing them with counselors at this point because of this issue. Police violence is gun violence, and I think that's all I want to say. So, thank you.
I agree with police violence being gun violence because it is all categorized the same.
Yeah.
Especially when you use equal protection under the law. Quick question. I'm not sure, Jenny, if this was already asked of you, but we have a question that asks, is there an analysis of county spending on policing across the Commonwealth on a per capita basis?
On police budgets?
Yeah, per county, on a per capita.
There isn't. I think police budgets were, at least I think have been really highlighted in the last 60 days, and before that were kind of not something anybody was really looking at with too close of an eye. So I would encourage anybody to do that. I will say there are some. There's a great website called costofpolice.org, which does look at the largest cities that spend money. You know, it has like top 10 cities in Virginia that spend money on policing, and it particularly draws out what percentage of the budget of a city's budget is going to policing. But the short answer to that question is no. There's no county by county breakdown. You'd have to go through each county and look at their city budget, and it's not even really that simple. And not to make this into a harder prospect for folks to do on their own, but because it can be done. It's just that the funding streams that fund things like this, they're complex for a reason. They're intentionally, in my opinion, deceptive of where the money's coming from, where it's going. The police get money from the federal government. They get money to militarize their police from the federal government. So in order to really truly look at even where your county or your city is really getting all of its funding for, you'd have to track that down a little bit. And we are happy to help you do that, and are currently working on doing that in cities where we feel like there's more urgency, i.e., places where we're seeing incredible police brutality in these protests. But I think you could uncover the budget and dig through that in almost any county or city and see just where that's going.
Thank you. Thank you. For the panelists, how can defunding stop police brutality? It's a question from the audience. How do you feel defunding? Go ahead, Bakura.
Defunding doesn't stop police brutality. The police brutality comes from a mindset. And so defunding doesn't change one's mindset. And so we have to be mindful of what this really does and what it is. Changing the law doesn't change a racist. We can make a law and say you can't be racist, but it's just not going to happen. And so, but by removing the office of police, we'll stop it. But then what we'll have is just individuals that will continue to do what it is that they do. You just won't end up in jail at this point. You'll just probably end up assaulted or something like that, but you won't have that attachment of having to go through a judicial process from being engaging with these individuals called police.
Thank you.
I think a couple things, but I think defunding in its relationship to actually decreasing police brutality is really just eliminating the interaction. I mean, I think we're trying to eliminate the interaction as much as possible. I mean, the situation we're in is that we have public safety tools that kill people and brutalize people and terrorize people. And we need to remove, you can do a lot of different policies. You can put a lot of different policies in place. And I'm a true believer that policies are racist, and you can change those racist policies, and then you can change the outcome through doing that. But I also think that when it comes to the police, what we advocate for is just, let's try to get the police away from people as much as possible, because time and time again, you put them in a school, you put them in a neighborhood, you put them in a house, someone dies, someone's murdered, and the only thing to change that is to just not put them there, because they're not capable of not doing it. So I totally agree with Carol on that front, that what solves this is the elimination of them being present, and then redelegating the role that put them there in the first place. So if it's because there's a mental crisis, something like that, I think there's some small things on the edges we can do there that are obvious, of redelegating some of these roles that don't make any sense. But yeah, generally speaking, I think just the reduction in the interaction is the only thing we're going for there.
I wanted to touch on that question too. So I think I do agree with what Jenny is saying. But I also would say that, in my opinion, defunding the police department, it removes a level of power. We all know that economic resources does create a level of power. And we were talking about this earlier, Latanya, where, you look at downtown Newport News, for instance, you have this huge police precinct in the middle of the hood, like multi-million-dollar building, probably one of the nicest buildings down in downtown Newport News. Psychologically, that asserts a level of power to all the members of that community. saying, here we have a multi-million-dollar building, but you know, all of you guys are living in substandard housing, but we put millions of dollars into a police precinct to keep you under control. So I think that, you know, defunding the police department will start to remove some of this perceived power that they tend to have, because with lack of funding, now you can't buy all these fancy weapons that you're using to kill our people with. Now you got to scale back on some of the training, you know, this combative style training that you're being trained in to subdue the average citizen, and reallocating those funds where it matter, which is, you know, in community programs in the same communities, you know, give that money back to the people that you have abused and mistreated, to help uplift these people. So I do think that, you know, defunding the police department not only sends a psychological message, but it allows us to reallocate those funds and invest it in programs that matter.
I agree. Moving to another question: does closing for-profit prisons fall anywhere in the defunding plan? Does closing for-profit prisons fall anywhere in the defunding plan? So when we talk about,
I think we want to close all of them, for-profit and not for-profit.
I was gonna say.
I mean,
yes, abolish prisons, period. I think it was important, you know, we had this conversation before, and it's like, what do we do with like mass murder, serial killers, and things like that? And that is where I am. That's where I'm at with that. What do we do with those who are predators that, you know, need to be kept away from society? And I'm not talking about people who, you know, may get in a scuffle with somebody, they have a gun, they shoot somebody, that person ends up dead. No, that's an incident. We're talking about people who deliberately go out, and I'm a predator and I want to kill 30 people today.
Serial killers and everything.
Yeah.
But my name is Wendy Gollenbach. I'm with Justice Support Group out of Boston. And one of the things that, you know, has a problem with the private prisons is that they're not feeding people. They're not caring for anybody. I'm 70 years old, okay? So I can lean back to a time when prisons were for people who, serial murderers. A lot of the mothers that are now in jail were all home. You know, they weren't put to prison. People who did drugs, who had wives, their wives weren't sent to prison. Now we're sending absolutely everybody to prison, but there's an exception, okay? Because in the new post-Reagan time, if you are Black or you are Hispanic or you are gay, that's LGBTIQ, IAQ, any kind of gay, you are Muslim now, the new ones, you're all going to jail. And you will get in that jail and you will find that the only people who are Caucasian who are in the jails have Black spouses or Hispanic spouses. There is an absolutely calculated, by the numbers, racist bias for who we're putting in jail. There was a thing today that I was looking at because I was writing a brief, and the numbers, the sheer numbers of non-violent people in prison, 51% of women in prison are not violent. Well, what the are they doing in prison? If this wasn't a racist system run by white supremacists, and I'm not talking about just the 3 years of Trump, because I've been screaming this for many, many years. This is the white supremacist core since Reagan, where Reagan actually said he wanted to have concentration camps for Black people, so he was going to fill the prisons. And he has. Right now, there's COVID in the prisons, in the federal system right now. The medical center that lost its accreditation and has no doctors has 300 people, 150 documented, 150 who have not been documented, that they're putting in segregation with no medicine because they have COVID. What the hell? The private prisons, worse. because they won't even report what they've done. They think because they have their lobbyists that own Trump, they can do anything they want, and they're doing anything they want. They're raping women, they're raping trans women, they're raping any bad behavior they want to do. They're beating people, and there's no recourse. I had a judge one time say, "What's your guy gonna lie to me about before I rule against him?" The judges are all in on it. It's not like they don't know. They're letting people die in prison right now of COVID, and they don't care. It's not their family. And, somewhere until we have civilian boards that say, hey, everything you've done the past 20 years is racist, we're taking you off the bench. There's got to be a review board for prosecutors, for judges, because they're all in cahoots, and police, sorry. The white supremacists are winning. They've got control of police, of prosecutors, and of judges. 99% conviction rate in federal prison right now, mostly by plea, because if you don't plea, you get what happened to Lori Loughlin, where they then charge you with a huge 30-year felony if you don't take the plea.
Thank
Horrible.
you. Thank you for your insight and the work that you're doing.
Keep trying.
Another question coming from the audience is, how does the NRA shape the policies and funding for militarizing police and schools? How does the NRA shape the policies and funding for militarizing police in our schools?
I actually don't know, but I have a feeling that Moms Demand Action has an answer, or potentially understand, might see this. They're a massive lobby, a huge lobby, gets tons and tons and tons of money. So it's totally in their best interest, to be doing this. So Heather, go for it.
Go, yeah. You got it, Heather.
Unmute yourself.
The NRA has been looking for this moment their entire lives. They have been fear-mongering people into thinking that more guns equals safety. And we all know this is not true, especially for Black and brown people. So it's insane. I mean, they're so giddy right now. It's kind of disgusting that they have the pandemic to kind of pander their more guns equals safety. And then they have all these protests. And, so you need to protect yourself. So more guns, the safer you'll be. I don't even know what else to say about that. It is what they were born to do and what they do. Tara, do you have anything else to add to that?
That was an interesting question, and I'm glad somebody asked that because it challenged my mind. I'm one that is for guns because I know the vulnerability of my population, and I know that we are one of, in fact, kind of like the only people who are super disenfranchised from being able to protect ourselves. And so if they are excited about this, they're just lucky that, at this particular time it's happening. But I do believe that Black people should have the right to arm themselves because we are targets of so many different types of abuse. And we should be able to keep ourselves safe. What we do know is that police have guns. What we do know is that white supremacists have guns. And what do we have? 911? I don't think so. And so we like that messaging about guns. It keeps us in a disenfranchised, vulnerable state. And although the guns is not the only way to protect yourselves, it is definitely one that we are not able to use. And once you're labeled a felon, there's all other different certain knives you can't have, certain bow and arrows, especially in Virginia, you can't have. And so it keeps us extremely disenfranchised. So I want us to be mindful of that when we spread that rhetoric, because a lot of us are just not safe out here, and especially our men.
I agree. Because the mass incarceration and the pipeline to prison and leading our men and our young people into felonies disarms our population a great deal. So I definitely agree with that. But with that being said, what I want to do is get back with Kofi so we can begin to wrap this up, because we know you want to sleep this evening. So we'll go ahead and wrap this amazing conversation. But we want to also put into your mind frames that this is the beginning of several conversations that will lead to transformative policy when it comes to changing and the policing within our communities and throughout Virginia as a whole. And with that, Kofi.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Latanya. Man, this we could probably keep talking about this for another hour and just still be skimming the surface. But I really want to thank all of our guests. Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you, Bakura. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Lavon. You guys were really incredible this evening, and really provided some a lot of personal stories, and I really appreciate you sharing a lot of those personal stories, because I know it's hard, know it's traumatizing. We don't take it for granted at all, that you're just willing to share these things. And so thank you so much for being willing to share your experiences, because a lot of people out here listening don't necessarily understand where people are coming from. They think like something like that happened with George Floyd is just kind of isolated incident. It's not. These things are happening all the time. We're just now seeing them on video. So thank you for listening. And what I would like to take this moment to kind of redirect your energy. If you want to stay involved, this website up here so we are part of a broader coalition called the Virginia Coalition for Transforming Police, and we came up with this package over the course of the last several weeks, after talking with hundreds of citizens across the Commonwealth. This package is called the Reimagined Police Package. It's the most comprehensive set of reforms that we would like to see done. It covers everything from the recruiting side of policing all the way to the accountability and everything in between. So we're urging our policymakers and legislators to implement the legislation that is covered in this package. Excuse me. And we will really need your support. So I threw the in the chat as well if you want to copy and paste it, but we're going to leave this up for a few more minutes. This recording is also going to be recorded and broadcasted on Facebook. We'll put it up again. Please share it with your friends. Share the website. Encourage if you're a lot of you are members of different organizations. Please urge your organization to sign on to the package to say that you support it. Contact your legislator. There's a lot that needs to happen in Virginia, as you can all tell. And this is a really narrow window of opportunity where in order to get this done. So this opportunity isn't going to last forever. So we hope that by next year, we see a drastically different, much transformed police that does start with defunding and reallocating some of the money that is currently put into these oppressive systems into something that actually uplifts the Black and Brown community. Thanks, Latanya, for pulling up that webpage. If you click on that red button right there, you'll see the full list of the police packaging. The legislative concepts. A lot of work went into this, and so we really could use your support. Contact. It doesn't have to be some of these traditional organizations. It could be a church. It could be your synagogues, your whatever clubs you belong to. Get as many people talking about it as possible, because it really can make a difference. That said, thank you so much, and everyone, please keep the questions coming in. There's a website, the email address that we just put up there, transformingpolice@gmail.com. Give us some questions on Facebook. We'll answer. If we didn't get to your question, we apologize, but thank you so much and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Blessings.